An individual who excels in multiple, often unrelated fields, possessing broad knowledge and high-level skill across various disciplines. That is the definition of a polymath, and history is filled with these kinds of people. Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, Ibn Sina, etc., etc. The key characteristic for me in terms of these people is that you can't confine them to a single label. Richard Feynman, for example, is a physicist, but Leonardo da Vinci is not a painter, a writer, a physician. He is simply Leonardo da Vinci. What they do is they build a set of core foundational meta skills and they apply it to a various number of domains. And actually, these end up being the people who make the most progress in those domains anyway. I'm not going to waste any of your time. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly why I think people like this can still exist today, and the lessons we can learn by looking a bit back in history, as well as looking at the modern landscape of academia and things like jobs, to understand where the kind of polymath model fits into today practically. Okay, so the polymath doesn't really exist anymore. I think that's a cold fact that we can basically start this analysis with, because whatever reason you think as to why that's the case, we can all agree on that. I don't believe the standard narrative as to why this is the case. The standard narrative you will hear as to why this is no longer a feasible thing that you can do is because of complexity. In times of Newton or something like this, we basically didn't know anything about anything. So we had all this low-hanging fruit, and essentially one person could just learn a bunch of different topics because there was not really that much to know. Whereas today, for example, if you look at just the field of mathematics alone, there I think is a 500-page book, literally just listing out all the different subfields of mathematics. Before we go through the video, I'm going to quickly address that because I think that is fucking stupid, and I'm going to explain why. The first reason is the underlying assumption that I've spoken about quite a few times on this channel, and I use the analogy of the pen to illustrate this, right? So the core issue here is that people mistake complexity with knowledge. So the pen, for example, I can explain as the sum of billions upon billions of individual atoms. That is extremely complex. That is objectively a complex system if I were to describe it like that. However, the fact remains, I am still only talking about the pen. I do not gain any knowledge about the table by making the pen more complex. Another thing is that complexity is arbitrary. I decide how complex this thing is. Just as I could have described it as the sum of billions of particles, I could also describe it as a singular point of mass in space. There is no objectivity here. There is no correct answer. Either one could be correct depending on the framework you're talking about. So saying that a field like mathematics, for example, is so vast and complex nowadays that you cannot learn all of it is meaningless to you and me, because complexity, one, is arbitrary, and two, learning more about the pen doesn't tell me anything about the table. This only exists as an issue if you use the constraints of limiting labels to begin with. If your whole identity is based on you being a mathematician, for example, and you want to learn all of mathematics, then yes, that is going to take ages to do. That will take more than an entire lifetime to do. But for the vast majority of people, well, to be fair, many people are just NPCs, but many people are also wide and complete individuals, meaning I am not constrained by being a mathematician. I will learn as much mathematics as I need in any given situation to do something that I actually want to do. And it's the same for anything. If I wanted to learn how to run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds, then I would do that. I would learn whatever is required to do that. You do not start with label thinking, and you do not start with trying to learn everything in a field, which is why breadth actually can still exist. Depth is not as valuable as people think, especially if 90% of what you are going to learn will never be used by you in whatever thing you are doing. Another thing that people who say this do is make the subconscious assumption that we know everything about everything. So this is what you'll hear from like scientists, for example. Scientists are actually some of the most arrogant people on the planet. They essentially will tell you that, oh, there's so many things that we still have yet to uncover. However, they don't truly believe that. They say that, but they don't believe it. And the underlying assumption with all of this is essentially we know everything there is to know about the universe. So the only logical conclusion we have then is that if you want to develop new knowledge, you must take the knowledge we have and make it more complex, dive deeper into it. So someone could, for example, develop an entirely new branch of mathematics because they had studied psychology for 2 years. And you're thinking psychology has nothing to do with mathematics. Exactly, that's the point. That's exactly why that person has the advantage. And why, actually, for a lot of human history, the polymath, the person who has more breadth than depth, was able to actually advance all of the different fields that they were in. Okay, so with that out of the way, that's enough philosophy. If I'm saying that the standard narrative is wrong, it would be helpful for me to provide an alternative. And my alternative is that actually the main structural issue here is academia, because academia is essentially caught in two minds. Academia is confused about what it's trying to do in the modern day. On the one hand, it's trying to be a source of qualifications for you to get standard, like, professional jobs in some office somewhere. So it tries to do that, but at the same time, it tries to hold to the core identity of academia. So that is the pursuit of knowledge. And I'm not saying that knowledge should be pursued for the sake of knowledge, by the way. I'm going to talk about that a bit more later, because I think that's actually stupid. And knowledge should be constrained by practical limitations. I'm going to talk about that later. But the point is that academia is structured such that you are siphoned into a single identity. So it takes ages to do anything within academia. It takes, like, an undergraduate degree is one thing, right? That takes 3-4 years. But to actually become a so-called expert in a field, it takes like 5 to 10 years. In reality, if your objective is to learn as much of a field for it to be useful for you in a specific thing, then it really doesn't take that long to do. But the whole point of academia is that it's a self-confined bubble. It's a self-confined system. So you're essentially training for 5 to 10 years in some kind of thing, let's say mathematics, so you can go into academia. Whereas in reality, someone could learn enough mathematics, as well as enough statistics, as well as enough psychology, as well as enough sports science to be able to do incredible things in all of these fields, because they're able to make connections where no one else thinks to make connections, but also just to develop themselves into someone who is indispensable in something like a business sense or a professional sense, which is starting to look far and far more relevant when something like AI is basically replacing everyone that is a so-called expert, i.e. they're a technical monkey who can just do something over and over again. If you can get a computer to do that, you are out the door. Okay, now back to the practical constraints thing. Forget about this whole idealistic idea of the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Even the people that you may look up to from history, these kind of polymaths, these titans of old, the kind of Newtons, Al-Ghazali, these kinds of people, the reason they were able to exist is because practical constraints were such that they could. So they, for example, would have lived in a society that actually valued their knowledge in some way. And you know what, granted, some of them may have just been rich kids from noble families who got sent off to university, like Newton or something, but some other examples that prove my point. So like the kind of Greek philosophers that were counselors to kings, or the Islamic Golden Age polymaths who would have developed religious writings as well, which was important to the society, so they were paid and able to do it, and they held high status, etc., etc. It all comes back to simple physical human constraints. When you look at it that way, actually you notice that the constraints themselves are not constant. So across history, people may have played the game slightly differently. And now what that means is that today is not unique. We are not special. There is no reason that we can't do this today. We simply have a new, different set of constraints. And if you're someone who clicked onto this video and you're someone who watched to this point, then you're someone with lots of different interests in lots of different things. Your For You page is like the clearest example of this. You know, one day you may be watching something more educational like this, another day you may be watching a cooking video and you have some interest in cooking, another day you may watch a film and be in awe at the cinematography. The point is that you want to be able to find a way for the interests that you have and the skills that you can develop to each build upon each other. This video is getting a bit long, but hopefully by this point I should have convinced you of 3 things. 1, that the standard reason as to why polymaths don't exist today is fucking stupid. 2, the polymath model can still exist today for you. 3, not only can it exist, but it actually may be more beneficial and lead to more improvements in firstly academia, but forget academia. We could be talking about making money. We could be talking about self-improvement. We could be talking about professionalism, anything like this. Because this one's getting kind of long, in my next video, I'm going to break down more practically exactly all the steps that you can do. So the core foundational meta knowledge and meta skills that you need to have, what the constraints will be and how to play the game accordingly, I guess, and how this can actually be used as a practical, stable life system. So to actually make money. Subscribe to stay tuned for that. If you're already subscribed, then make sure to like the video so that more people can see it and the discourse grows. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.